I want to get you right back to this live look here over State Farm Stadium. That is over in Glendale outside of Phoenix, where this week we're going to see family, friends, and supporters of Charlie Kirk coming together Sunday to honor the life and legacy of the conservative political activist. The 31-year-old killed in a targeted assassination last week as he spoke to a crowd of thousands there at Utah Valley University in Orem, survived by his wife and children. We're going to air that service in full, commercial-free, here on Live Now from Fox. Again, our live coverage will start Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, all leading up to the service at 2 p.m. Eastern. That is 11 a.m. local time. Now, ahead of that public service, we're hearing from those who knew Kirk best. And I do want to bring in Jobob Taeleifi, a comedian and the host of Turning Point Tonight, to talk a little bit more about Charlie Kirk and his legacy. Jobob, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And first off, I do want to ask you here how you want to make sure that Charlie Kirk is remembered. When people think about him in the coming years and decades, how do you personally want to make sure that he's remembered?
You know, there's a lot of words that can probably describe Charlie, but I think one that I think encapsulates his tenacity is relentless. The guy, you know, love him or hate him, was doing everything in his power every second of the day, not wasting a single minute to do what he wanted to do for this country, which, you know, in my opinion, is save the country and promote the values that the country was founded on. He had the tenacity of 10 different people all combined into one, and I'm not just saying that to, you know, inflate the memory of what he was. That was legitimately true. If you ask anybody who knew him, he was the hardest working guy in politics and media, but really just in general. He was just one of those guys that just kept going and going and going because he believed in what he was doing and wouldn't slow down any other way.
One thing that's interesting is President Trump was doing a Fox News interview, I believe it was late last night, and said that Charlie Kirk had the potential to one day be president. I want to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes without saying. He always had, he kind of deflected that question whenever it was asked, when are you going to run for office? When are you going to do the next thing? And he always said, you know, I'm happy where I am. He seems like he makes a good difference in the way that he wants to. But obviously, at the top levels, I think there was a deep understanding that this was going to be the guy. He was smart enough. He had the intellect. And the computing power that his brain had was just far and away anybody that I know, or really anybody knows. It's always been hard to describe him because you don't know anybody like a Charlie Kirk. And I think when the president is asked, you know, could he have been a president? I think pretty equivocally he could have said yes, absolutely. And you know, unfortunately, you know, we'll never see that that whether or not it would have happened or not. We'll never see it pan out, which is you know, obviously the horrible situation that we're put in right now. But yeah, no, I think anybody who knew him would say, yeah, that's not that far off base that Charlie would be president someday.
How do you think that Charlie's vision shaped the conservative party and the movement? Because we actually heard from Vice President J.D. Vance as well, who said earlier this week, without Charlie Kirk, he may not have been elected and may not be in that office.
Yeah, I think Charlie himself would say the whole goal of what Turning Point is an organization, his organization was trying to do, is engage the youth voters, because that's been so long been kind of just left aside, especially by conservatives in the country. And Charlie just took that head on and said, I'm going to go do this. You know, he was known, he was famous for going to college campuses and sitting there for hours too. A bunch of people see these video clips online and they kind of think, okay, well, this is a, you know, 60-second, 90-second thing. He would be on that campus for 3 to 4 hours straight and talking to all of these students, really anybody who had a question. And that just wasn't something that was being done in the conservative movement, or really in politics more broadly. I think the left kind of figured, well, we have this group wrapped up, and the right kind of wrote them off, and we're never gonna get that group. And Charlie said, no, absolutely not. We're gonna go after these young kids. We're gonna make sure that they know what it is that they're actually voting on and voting for. And that, I think, was his deepest passion, to get that generation up to speed on what the American belief and ideals were. And he did that better than anybody, I think, has done it at all, really. And so when President or Vice President Vance is saying that, yeah, we might not be here without Charlie Kirk. Yeah, there's a huge voting block. President Trump did better than any Republican in recent memory among the youth voters. And I think a lot of that can be directly attributed to Charlie Kirk.
I want to ask you about his wife, Erica, because just 2 days after his death there, she did speak for about 15 minutes, delivering a message. And a big part of that was about the fact that Turning Point will still continue. It will go on. And just yesterday, we saw her elected unanimously as the new leader of Turning Point. Where do you see the future of Turning Point under her leadership? I have to imagine it's fairly similar to what her husband did.
The only difference I see is getting bigger and better faster. And that's not to say that Charlie wouldn't have done the same thing. It's just that the fervor around it, especially with this tragedy, is going to magnify Turning Point's scope enormously. I will tell you, on Friday morning, everybody in the Turning Point community, although, resolute in what they were doing, were kind of, what is going to happen? Where are we going to go? And then the announcement came that Erica was going to make a speech. And I remember immediately after reading that, I turned to my wife and said, this is amazing. I couldn't do this. Obviously, under the horrible circumstances, nobody wants to be put in that position. But I genuinely don't think that close to the assassination of a spouse, I would be able to get up there and stand like a brick wall and say, we are not going anywhere. And so Friday evening, Friday afternoon, when that speech was given, I think the resolve that Turning Point and the Turning Point family had was emboldened and was resolute, and we are not going anywhere. So over the course of the next, several years, several decades, I think it's going to be exponential to what Turning Point has been doing, and we're going to continue to grow as an organization and do what Charlie would have wanted.
I want to ask your take on another big story that we've been following here over the past several days, as ABC did pull the plug on Jimmy Kimmel and his show, in part there due to a joke that he made about Charlie Kirk. And you're a comedian. I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah. So me and Charlie disagreed on Jimmy Kimmel, and we talked about it briefly a couple times. I think Jimmy Kimmel's actually pretty funny. Not, when he's getting too far into the weeds against people that disagree with him. But the comedy business is a difficult business to be in, and especially if you're in a late night slot and you decide specifically, hey, we're going to tack, but only to one side. You cut your audience and viewership in half. Stephen Colbert did effectively the same thing. And over the last 10 years, Jimmy Kimmel has lost 50 to 60% of his audience. Now, the joke in question wasn't actually a joke. There's a longer clip playing on social media where he makes a joke about President Trump. That wasn't even close to what people were upset about. What they were upset about is the statement of fact, and said in kind of a pompous and smug way that, well, of course, the Charlie's assassin was a Charlie fan. Effectively, that's what he said. I'm characterizing here. But that's effectively what he said. And the big syndication outlets, or the big broadcast outlets, not to get into the weeds about how broadcast works, they have a lot of audience in the middle of the country. And this is not the first time, not necessarily with this sort of controversy, but this is not the first time a late night talk show has been met with those broadcasters affiliates going, hey, we're no longer going to take the show. It happened to Conan O'Brien. I'm not, saying Conan O'Brien said anything bad, but I think there was a Philadelphia syndicate or a Philadelphia affiliate that said, hey, we're not going to take the show anymore. And then the dominoes started falling. And all of that is to say that Sinclair and Nexstar and a bunch of other affiliates that hopped on board, said this is unacceptable, were the reason why ABC took it down. There's a lot of argument to be said that, well, the Trump administration pressured them. And, I don't necessarily want to get into a big debate here, but the reason that's ridiculous is that nobody actually did anything. There were not actually any licenses pulled. And even if there was, I think ABC Disney has enough leverage in the legal department to go file a lawsuit, and they'd be easily able to find a federal judge, which we've seen so many times before, block President Trump and doing, taking away the licenses. So the idea of quote unquote censorship by the government doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. There is an idea of losing your show due to audience numbers and viewership, and I think that's actually what happened. And again, this is coming from a guy who, generally speaking, when he's not, diving too far into some crazy political nonsense, I think Jimmy Kimmel's kind of funny. So that's my thought on it. I don't necessarily know that the censorship angle is really going to pan out the way I think a bunch of people pushing that are going to. The reality is, viewers, if my show lacks viewers, I get quote unquote canceled, and that's just how the business works.
All right, Jobob, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and to talk about Charlie, his life, his legacy, and of course, some other big headlines there. Thank you again for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate you having me.
And I do want to pop up this shot once again. This is over State Farm Stadium there in Glendale, Arizona. That is just outside of Phoenix, and that is where that public service is going to be held for Charlie Kirk on Sunday. Our live coverage will start at 12 p.m. Eastern. That will lead up into the funeral service set for 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to bring that to you in full, commercial free here as we have those feeds coming in on LiveNOW from Fox.